The shadow of obsession. Ethan Carter had spent years navigating the murky waters of the criminal underworld, but nothing had ever felt as dangerous as this. A seasoned private investigator with a reputation for solving the most elusive cases, Ethan had built his career on instinct, intuition, and a relentless pursuit of the truth. His office, nestled in the heart of the city, was a sanctuary of old case files, dusty photographs, and the faint scent of coffee that had long since turned to dust. It was here that he first noticed the photograph. It had been tucked inside a file that had no name, no case number, just a single grainy image of a woman, her face partially obscured by shadow, standing in the middle of a dimly lit alley. There was something about her that unsettled him, a presence that felt too familiar, yet completely foreign. The letter that accompanied the photograph was even more unsettling. It was written in elegant, looping script, the ink faded but still legible. "He's coming for you," it read. "You can't run forever." The message was vague, but the implication was clear. Someone was watching, someone was waiting. Ethan had seen enough to know that this wasn't a random threat. It was a warning. He had no idea who had sent it, but he had a feeling it was only the beginning. As he stared at the photograph, a strange sense of unease crept over him. He had spent years chasing ghosts, but for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was the one being hunted. The pull of the unknown. Ethan had seen enough to know that this wasn't a random threat. It was a warning. He had no idea who had sent it, but he and Lon. Photograph, the weight of the letter pressing against his chest like an invisible noose. He had always prided himself on his ability to remain detached, to approach every case with a cool, calculating mind. But this was different. This wasn't just another case. It was personal. The woman in the photo, though her face was obscured, seemed to reach out to him, as if she were calling to him from the shadows. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen her before, though he couldn't place where or when. It was as if she had been a part of his life, a presence that had lingered just out of reach, waiting for the moment he would finally see her. His thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of his phone ringing. He answered it, his voice low and steady. "Carter!" A voice on the other end spoke, but it was too distorted to recognize. "You need to stop looking!" The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone, his heart pounding. Who was this? And why did they think he was looking for something? The letter, the photograph, the cryptic message, each piece of the puzzle was pulling him deeper into a mystery he couldn't yet understand. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the desk. He had spent years chasing leads, following trails that often led to dead ends. But this was different. This was personal, and that made it more dangerous. He had always believed that love was a force that could transcend even the darkest of circumstances, but this wasn't love. It was obsession. He could feel it in the way his thoughts kept. Circling back to the photograph, the way his pulse quickened whenever he thought of the woman's face. It was as if she had become a part of him, a ghost that he couldn't escape. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan began his search. He started with the photograph, running it through every database he had access to. It didn't take long for him to find a name. Lila. The name was familiar, but not in the way he expected. He had heard it before, but never in the context of the photograph. It was as if the name had been buried, hidden away from the world. He dug deeper, uncovering fragments of a life that had been erased, a history that had been carefully constructed to keep her from the world. But the more he learned, the more questions he had. Why had she been hidden? What had happened to her? And why was someone threatening him now? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that someone was watching him just as closely as he was watching her. The thought sent a chill down his spine, but he couldn't stop. He had to know the truth, no matter the cost. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across his office, Ethan felt the pull of the unknown grow stronger. He was no longer just an investigator. He was a man caught in a web of love and obsession, a man who had no choice but to follow the trail no matter where it led. Shadows and secrets. Ethan knew he couldn't solve this mystery alone. He needed help, and he knew exactly who to turn to. Detective Marlowe was one of the few people in the city who understood the fine line between obsession and obsession. She had seen it all, cases that had spiraled out of control, relationships that had turned to madness, and people who had lost themselves in the pursuit of the truth. When Ethan arrived at her office, she was already waiting, her sharp eyes scanning him as if she could see the storm brewing inside him. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm but edged with concern. "You're not making this easy for yourself." "I don't have a choice," he replied, his voice low. "There's something about this case, about Lila, that I can't ignore." Marlowe leaned back in her chair, studying him for a moment before nodding. "Fine, but you need to be careful. This isn't just about finding a missing person. Someone is watching you, Ethan, and they're not going to stop until they get what they want." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He just stared at her, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy fog. He had always thought of himself as a man who could handle anything, but this was different. This wasn't just a case, it was a game, and he was already playing it with someone who had the upper hand. As the days passed, Ethan found himself drawn into a web of people whose lives were entwined with Lila's. Some were willing to help, others were entwined with Lila's. Some were willing to help, others were more elusive, and a few were outright hostile. There was a woman named Clara, a former friend of Lila's who had disappeared years ago. ago. She had been one of the buy-in, and he was already playing it with someone who had the upper hand. As the days passed, Ethan found himself drawn into a web of people whose lives were entwined with Lila's. Some were willing to help, others were more elusive, and a few were outright hostile. There was a woman named Clara, a former friend of Lila's. He had disappeared years ago. Few people who had known Lila before she had vanished, but she was reluctant to speak. She was a good person, Clara said when Ethan finally managed to get her to talk, but she had secrets. Secrets that made her the kind of person people wanted to disappear. Then there was the man who had been working with Ethan on the case. Miles, a private investigator with a reputation for being both brilliant and dangerous. He had a way of getting information that others couldn't, but he came with a price. "You want to know the truth?" he asked one night, his voice low as they sat in a dimly lit bar. "Then you need to be ready for what you find. Because once you start looking, there's no turning back." But it was the mysterious figure who appeared. In the library that truly unsettled Ethan. He had been following a lead, a name that had surfaced in a long-forgotten case file. The library was quiet, the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. And there, in the corner, was a man who had been watching him. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared as if he was waiting for something. When Ethan finally approached him, the man simply handed him a letter. It was the same letter he had received before, but this time there was a name at the bottom. His own. Ethan felt a chill run through him. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a game, and he was the one being played. The breaking point. The night air was thick with tension as Ethan stood outside the library. The letter, clutched tightly in his hand. His mind raced, the words on the paper burning into his memory like a brand. "He's coming for you! You can't run forever!" The message had been vague before, but now, with the name at the bottom of the letter, it felt like a direct threat. He had always known that this case was different, but now he understood the true weight of the danger he was in. Someone was watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike, and he had no idea who was behind it. He turned back toward the library, his heart pounding. The man who had given him the letter had disappeared into the shadows, leaving no trace of where he had gone. Ethan knew he couldn't let this go. He had to find out who was behind it, who had sent the letter, and why. He had spent years chasing ghosts, but this time the ghost was real, and it was watching him. As he stepped inside the library, the silence was suffocating. The air was heavy with the scent of old books and dust, the kind of place where secrets were buried and forgotten. He moved carefully, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He had come here to find answers, but he wasn't sure what he was prepared for. Then he saw her. Standing in the center of the room, bathed in the dim glow of the overhead lights, was the woman from the photograph. She was real. She was here. And she was watching him. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had spent weeks searching for her, following leads that had led him nowhere, chasing whispers and half-truths. And now, here she was, standing before him like a specter from his past. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just looked at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. Was it fear, regret, or something else entirely? Then, without warning, she stepped forward. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You were never supposed to find me." His heart pounded in his chest. He had spent so long searching for her, and now that she was here, he wasn't sure if he was relieved or terrified. "I had to find you," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I had to know the truth." She looked away for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned. "Pray me." His heart pounded in his chest. He had spent so long searching for her, and now that she was here, he wasn't sure if he was relieved or terrified. "I had to find you," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Back to him, and for the first time, he saw the fear in her eyes. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You were never meant to be part of this." Before he could respond, the lights flickered, and the library plunged into darkness. A moment later, the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls, and Ethan knew he was no longer alone. He had been right all along. Someone was watching him. And now they had found him. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he couldn't move. He was frozen in place, his mind racing with the implications of what he had just learned. She wasn't just a missing person, she was someone who had been hiding, someone who had been running from something. And now she was standing before him, and he was no longer alone. Someone was watching him. And now they had found him. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he couldn't move. He was frozen in place, his mind racing with the implications of what he had just learned. She wasn't just a missing person. She was no longer just an investigator. He was a man who had crossed a line he wasn't sure he could ever go back from. The shadows around him deepened, and for the first time, Ethan felt the weight of the obsession that had been pulling him toward this moment. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a choice, and he had no idea what the cost would be. The transformation of Ethan Carter. As the shadows deepened around him, Ethan felt the transformation within himself begin to take shape. What had started as a simple investigation had morphed into an obsession that consumed his thoughts, his emotions, and his very sense of self. The woman in the photograph was no longer just a mystery to solve. She had become a part of him, a haunting presence that pulled him deepened, and for the first time, Ethan felt the transformation within himself begin to take shape. What had started as a simple investigation had Methanscon into the labyrinth of his own desires. He could no longer separate the truth from the fantasy, the reality from the illusion. Each time he uncovered a piece of her past, it felt like a step closer to understanding not just her, but himself. Ethan's heart raced with a mixture of fear and longing, a duality that gnawed at his mind. He had always believed that love was a force that could conquer all, but now he was beginning to see the shadows that lurked beneath its surface. Obsession was a different kind of love, one that twisted and turned, leaving him breathless and desperate. He found himself haunted by visions of Lila, her face flickering in his mind like a mirage, and he could not escape the pull of her. The more he delved into her life, the more he felt the weight of the past pressing down on him. He discovered fragments of her story, whispers of a tragic love affair, a betrayal that had shattered her, and a life that had been lived in the shadows. Each revelation only deepened his connection to her, and with it came a growing sense of urgency. He had to know the truth, but he also felt the pull of something more dangerous, the desire to protect her, to save her from the very darkness that had consumed her. Ethan's internal conflict raged within him. He was torn between the need to uncover the secrets that had hidden her from the world and the fear that doing so might unravel everything he had come to know about her. He had always prided himself on being the one who could see through the lies, but now he found himself entangled in a web of emotions that he couldn't control. He was no longer just an investigator. He was a man who had become entwined with the very essence of love and obsession, and it terrified him. As the days turned into nights, he found himself spending more time in the shadows, chasing leads that led him further away from the life he had known. The city, once a familiar landscape, now felt like a maze of secrets and lies, each corner hiding a piece of the puzzle that was Lila. He was consumed by the need to know her, to understand her, to feel the connection that had been forged between them. But with each step he took toward the truth, he felt the weight of the past pressing down on him, a reminder that some truths were not meant to be uncovered. Ethan's mind was a battlefield of conflicting desires. He wanted to save her, to rescue her from the darkness that had claimed her, but he also feared the consequences of his actions. What if he found her only to lose her again? What if the truth was something he wasn't ready to face? The more he learned, the more he realized that love and obsession were not merely two sides of the same coin. They were intertwined, each feeding the other in a dangerous dance. In the depths of his heart, Ethan knew that he was on the precipice of something monumental. The line between love and obsession was blurring, and he was no longer sure which side he was on. As the shadows of the past loomed larger, he felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him, a reminder that the path he had chosen was not just about uncovering the truth, but about confronting the very essence of his own heart. And in that moment, he understood that the greatest danger he faced was not the unknown, but the love that had begun to consume him. The truth unveiled. The library was silent, save for the soft rustle of pages turning and the distant echo of footsteps. Ethan stood in the center of the room, his heart pounding as he stared at the woman who had haunted his every thought. Lila. He had spent weeks chasing her, following the trail of a mystery that had consumed him, but now, standing before her, he realized that the truth was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady but laced with something he couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps, or regret. "You were never meant to find me." He took a step forward, his mind racing. "You were running from something," he said, his voice low. "I had to know why." Lila's eyes flickered with something that looked like pain. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I didn't run from something. I ran from something. I ran from you." The word struck him like a blow. He had always believed that he had been chasing her, that he had been the one seeking her out. But now, standing before her, he realized that the truth was far more complicated. He had been the one she had run from. The room seemed to shift around him, the shadows deepening as if the very air was holding its breath. He could feel the weight of the past pressing down on him, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. "I don't understand," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you run from me?" Lila looked away, her hands trembling slightly. "Because I loved you," she said, "and I was afraid that if I stayed, I would lose you." The word sent a jolt through him, a sharp pain that twisted in his chest. He had always thought that he had been the one chasing her, that he had been the one chasing her, that he had been the one who had found her, but now he saw the truth. She had been the one who had run, not from the mystery, but from him. He took another step forward, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "You were hiding from me?" She nodded slowly. I didn't want to see you again. Not after everything that happened. The words sent a shiver down his spine. What happened? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Lila looked at him, her eyes filled with something that looked like sorrow. You don't remember, do you? Ethan shook his head. I don't remember anything about you. She took a slow, deliberate breath, as if bracing herself for what she was about to say. We were together once, she said. We were together once, she said. You were the one who made me feel safe, the one who made me feel safe with something that love could be real. Ethan's mind reeled. You don't remember, do you? You hadn't remembered, do you? Ethan shook his head. I don't remember anything about you. She took a slow, deliberate breath, as if bracing herself for what she was about to say. We were together once, she said. Her, of them. But as he looked at her now, he could see the echoes of a past life in her eyes, a history that had shaped her and had shaped him in ways he had never realized. I left you, she said, her voice trembling, because I was afraid. I was afraid that if I stayed, I would lose you. And I did. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. You left me? She nodded. I had to. I didn't want to see you again, not after what happened. What happened? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila looked away, her eyes filled with something that looked like regret. You were in danger, she said, and I couldn't protect you. I couldn't save you. Ethan felt the weight of her words settle over him like a heavy fog. What did you do? She looked at him, her eyes filled with something that looked like sorrow. I ran, she said. I left you behind. I thought that was the only way to protect you. Ethan felt his heart break in that moment. He had spent years chasing her, searching for the truth, and all the while she had been running from him. I don't understand, he said, his voice shaking. Why would you do that? Lila looked at him, her eyes filled with something that looked like love. Because I loved you, she said. And I was afraid that if I stayed, I would lose you. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He had spent so long searching for her, for the truth, and all the while she had been running from him. Now that he had found her, he realized that the greatest mystery had been the one that had been inside him all along. He had never forgotten her. He had never stopped loving her. And now, standing before her, he finally understood. The price of love. As the weight of Lila's words settled over him, Ethan felt the world shift around him. The library, once a place of mystery and shadows, now seemed to hold the answer to everything he had ever searched for. But with that answer came a realization that left him breathless. Love had never been the enemy. It had been the very thing that had kept him searching, that had pulled him back into the past even when he had tried to forget. He looked at Lila, and for the first time, he saw the truth in her eyes. She had never been running from the mystery. She had been running from him. And now, as they stood in the silence of the library, he understood that the greatest danger he had ever faced wasn't the unknown, but the love that had been waiting for him all along. I never meant to leave you, she whispered, her voice trembling. I was afraid. Ethan took a step forward, his heart pounding. Afraid of what? She looked away, her hands trembling. Afraid that if I stayed, I would lose you again. The words sent a shiver through him. He had spent so long searching for her, chasing the truth, but now he realized that the truth had been right in front of him all along. She had never been lost. She had been waiting just as he had been searching. I never forgot you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I never stopped loving you. Lila's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked as if she might break. You don't understand, she said. I thought I had lost you. I thought you were gone. Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. I was never gone, he said. I was just looking for you. For a moment, the silence between them was suffocating. Then, slowly, Lila stepped forward and he pulled her into his arms. The weight of the past, the mystery, the obsession, it all melted away in that instant. He had spent years chasing a ghost, only to find that the ghost had been real all along. But, he said, his fingers brushing against hers. I was just looking for you. For a moment, the silence between them was suffocating. Then, slowly, Lila stepped forward and he pulled her into his arms. Even as he held her, he knew that love was not without its dangers. It had nearly broken them both. It had led him down a path of obsession, of chasing something that had been right in front of him all along. And now, as he stood in the library with Lila in his arms, he realized that the greatest lesson he had learned was that love was not just about finding someone. It was about knowing when to let go, when to trust, and when to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I'm not going to run this time, he said, his voice steady. Not from you. Not from love. Lila looked up at him, her eyes filled with something that looked like hope. Then you have to promise me something, she said. What? That you won't let the past define us, that you won't let the mystery consume us again. Ethan nodded. I promise. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. The mystery was over, the obsession had ended, and the love that had nearly destroyed them had finally found its way back to him. But as he looked into Lila's eyes, he knew that the greatest mystery of all was still unanswered. Would love be enough to keep them together, or would the past, the shadows of the past, always be waiting in the corners of their lives, ready to pull them back into the darkness? He didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't care, because love had found him, and he was ready to. face whatever came next. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. Hit the notification bell to be notified of new stories when they become available. Feel free to leave a comment and tell me if you enjoyed the story and want to hear more like it.